Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Talking to the Void. I'm your friendly neighborhood host, and today we're continuing the series The Death of the MCU with the start of the juiciest section of my argument, where I talk about the last two installments in the Infinity Saga, starting with Avengers Infinity War. Let's get into it. The third warning sign that should have told me that the MCU was entering bad zone / point of no return territory was them killing off Loki within the first few minutes of Infinity War. Granted, Loki was and still is my favorite MCU character, along with Bucky, so I am biased. But I have reasons beyond that, so listen up. Loki has a rich and detailed character arc where he struggles to choose to be good. He is unappreciated, overlooked, and shunned, and unsurprisingly, turns to unsavory allies and means to achieve his ends. In Thor the Dark World, we see him start turning more towards the light, trying to be better, helping Thor defend Jane from the Dark Elves, cooperating. Granted, he does steal the throne at the end of the movie, but there were other more ruthless ways that he could have gone about it, and he did not have to help Thor as much as he did. Then, in Thor Ragnarok, we see him turning more and more towards the light, ultimately swooping in to help Thor when all hope looks lost during the fight against Hela. And, by the end of that movie, he has redeemed himself, and he and Thor make up and hug, albeit off-screen. I will forever be mad that that hug was off-screen, but this is not the time or place for me to rant about it. To summarize, Loki's character arc is about finding one's identity and redemption, something that I and many other Loki fans heavily relate to. And while you could argue that Loki dying trying to stop Thanos was an appropriate end to his character arc, I would argue that it's not. Not only did he try to stab Thanos with a butter knife, and we know Loki is smarter than that, this ending tied up Loki's redemption arc, but not his identity arc. With Loki more or less having chosen to be good by the end of Thor Ragnarok, there was so much potential for exploring his identity as a hero or even anti-hero. There was so much potential for his interactions with the Avengers when he and Thor got to Earth, had he actually made it to Earth in Infinity War. But the writers decided to fridge him. Why am I calling it fridging? Because the sole purpose of Loki's death was to motivate Thor to kill Thanos. The writers could have kept Loki alive and made a vengeance arc with Loki and Thor together avenging the Asgardians that Thanos killed on the ship, but instead they chickened out and killed Loki. I will not stop being salty and mad about this, and I will call out the MCU for being cowards every chance I get, but that isn't what you're here for. To recap that rant, the third warning sign was the writers killing off Loki in Infinity War before the chance of resurrection that all the dusted characters got. When all the characters who got dusted with all the characters who got dusted, we knew that there was a strong chance that they would be brought back in Endgame, or at least at some point. However, the writers killed Loki before the dusting happened, so he wouldn't have an opportunity to return, and I genuinely can't think of a good reason to have done that. In fact, I would argue that it would have been more impactful to see Loki be redeemed and fighting alongside the Avengers in Wakanda, only for him to be dusted in front of Thor. Then we could get him back in Endgame, and we could get our proper "the sun will shine on us again" moment between the brothers that they robbed us of. The whole point in killing Loki was shock value and motivation for Thor to kill Thanos, and in my opinion, it was very poorly done. I could go on and on ranting about this and how frustrated I am that Marvel made this choice, not only because Loki is and was one of my favorite characters, but because there just really was no good reason for it. But I will end the rant here because I could go on for literal hours about this, and that's not what you're here for. So that is all for this episode of my series, The Death of the MCU. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like this video and consider subscribing to my channel so you don't miss any upcoming videos in this series. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Sending you all the love. Hello, surprise editing host here. I was going to edit this video and then I remembered that I saved a few Pinterest posts about how Marvel poorly handled the end of Loki's character arc. And so I just thought I'd share those posts because I feel like they help to illustrate my point about why they really shouldn't have killed off Loki in Infinity War and why it was a coward move to do so. And I will forever be salty about that. But I just wanted to share these because I feel like they articulate why it was such a bad idea to kill off Loki, and also how that really betrayed their viewers. So, surprise, you get bonus content this episode. So the first one, do be warned, there is a minor swear in it. I try very hard not to swear on this channel, but I will be reading this post that has a very minor swear in it. So for context, this one is in sort of a meme format. I think this was originally from Tumblr. It's Loki and Odin towards the beginning of Thor Ragnarok when they meet for the final time because Odin is dying and then passes on. And the caption says, "Least favorite trope. Years of emotional neglect/abuse swept under the rug by one scene where a parent admits that they loved their child all along, and their broken, traumatized victim adult child accepts their half-assed non-apology, and the audience should too, because the writers think that's closure." That also really bothered me, so, I mean, I didn't talk about this because this was a Thor Ragnarok thing and not an Infinity War thing, although I did mention that Thor Ragnarok leads directly into Infinity War. But anyway, yeah, Loki just basically has to accept Odin's apology for not being a better dad, and that just fails to acknowledge all of the ways in which Odin was a terrible father to Loki, and also was kind of just not a good father at all, period, because he had 3 children who could have been the most powerful beings in the universe if he hadn't sucked at parenting, but because he sucked at parenting, the one is just straight up evil, and the other 2 have a very tense sibling relationship. But anyway, that's one post. Here is another post about Infinity War Loki specifically. So the person just said, "Infinity War Loki deserves so much better," and then they shared yet another post where somebody said, "Killing off a deeply traumatized character purely for shock value when they have fought so hard for their healing and were so close to a happier ending they could almost touch it is the worst trope to ever exist." And yes, I completely agree, because they really only did kill off Loki for shock value, and they did more or less fridge him, as I said, in order to motivate Thor. And he is a very complex and deeply traumatized character, and we saw him finally beginning to heal by the end of Ragnarok and reconcile with Thor, and then they just completely freaking threw that out the window by killing him immediately in Infinity War. So yeah, I really don't like that trope as somebody who identifies a lot with Tom Hiddleston's portrayal of Loki and just how much they put into that character, and then the writers just freaking threw that all away in Infinity War. But yeah, that I really don't like that they had this character who went through all of this trauma, made some bad choices admittedly, but was really trying to be better and heal, and then they just killed him before he could even like show the continuation of his redemption arc. Like, he was kind of redeemed, I guess, by the end of Thor Ragnarok, but then they didn't let him fully explore this redeemed, potentially, version of himself come Infinity War, and that frustrates me so much. And then last post, because I don't want this tangent to go on for too terribly long, this is a series of Tumblr posts, and so I'm just going to go ahead and read them. Somebody said, "Still salty about how Loki was not avenged come Endgame," and yes, I'm salty about that as well. Somebody said, "How about how sickening it is knowing someone who was horribly abused, instead of overcoming the abuse and outliving their abuser, was brutally murdered by the abuser, and no one in the Marvel Universe cared." The abuser here they're talking about is Thanos, of course, because Thanos is the one who tortured and manipulated Loki in the first Avengers movie, although admittedly the vast majority of the torture happened off screen and was implied, but point still stands. It's just not like funny, but more ironic that when I first read this post, when they were talking about the abuser, I was like, "Oh, you mean Odin?" And then I'm like, "Oh wait, no, they meant Thanos. This poor child has been through so much." But anyway, post continues. "How about the fact that millions of fans connected with him from day one, having survived their own abuse, only to see someone they related to and connected with killed by their abuser within the first 10 minutes of a movie that came right after a movie where that character was humiliated, physically and verbally assaulted, and treated like absolute garbage by the one person who is left who is supposed to love him? How about the fact that millions of abuse survivors saw a character they related to subjected to a massive tirade of abuse that was played off as a joke?" And so yes, in that part they're talking more about how Thor was rather dismissive of Loki in Thor Ragnarok, and while I'm not thrilled that that was the choice they made, I do think that it is true to Thor's character that he doesn't fully understand everything that Loki went through, and so he still calls him out on the things that he does wrong and doesn't always treat him as nicely as perhaps he should. So that's what they're talking about in the second half of the post, but it is really horrible in my opinion that they had this character who survived all of these terrible things and ultimately by the end of it was trying to come out the other side a better person after having struggled so much, and then they just immediately killed that character. And yeah, that is a huge part of why I think Marvel is screwed, because they had such an excellent complex character and then fridged him, which was a massive betrayal of the character, of the actor Tom Hiddleston, who beautifully portrayed this character, and of the fan base. Because what do you mean you built up this character only for him to just, die really violently at the hands of the person who manipulated and abused him for the first Avengers movie? Yeah, I don't like that. So anyway, that is this tangent went on longer than I expected because I get real rambly when we start talking about ways that people have done my favorite characters dirty. And also, I know that I said the word killed in there, but it doesn't really matter. Why? Because YouTube doesn't pay me money for my videos anyway. None of my stuff is monetized, so I don't really care. Also, I feel like we ought to be able to use language to describe exactly, what something is, rather than have to dance around it for the sake of censorship. But that's a whole other thing that I may cover in another video. But anyway, thank you for listening to this unexpectedly long tangent after I talked about Loki's unfortunate demise in Infinity War. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments about, how they treated Loki's character arc, whether or not you like the Loki show, which is potentially something I will talk about in the future. And yeah, thank you so much for joining me for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one. I'm sending you all the love.